Titanic story is often told as a collision with ice, but long before the iceberg, there was a reshuffle, a key, a locked cabinet, and a chain of small choices moving quietly towards the Atlantic Ocean. Before the Titanic struck the iceberg, before the rockets rose into the night, before lifeboats drifted under a starless sky, there was a key. This is the version of the Titanic story people are unaware of. A small key taken off the ship by a man who had been replaced at the last moment. A key that was said to belong to a locker connected to the crow's nest. A key that in the language of fate could have changed everything. The truth is colder than the legend. Titanic was not doomed by one object. It was doomed by confidence, by speed, by missed warnings, by a calm sea that hid ice instead of revealing it, by a culture that believed a great liner such as the Titanic could outrun danger because greatness itself had become a kind of armor. Second Officer David Blair had originally been assigned to Titanic for a maiden voyage. Then, at the last moment, White Star Line reshuffled the officers. Henry Wilder came over from the Olympic. Other men moved down the chain. Blair was removed from the voyage entirely, and when he left, he reportedly took the key with him. Over time, that detail attached itself to the absence of the binoculars for the lookout. The story became almost too perfect. The wrong man leaves, the wrong key leaves with him, and the right men are left in the dark. On the night of April 14th, 1912, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee were high in the crow's nest, staring into the black air of the ship. The sea was strangely calm. There were no white waves breaking against iceberg bases. There was no moon. The Atlantic was flat, dark, and deceptive. During the later inquiry, Fleet said the lookouts had no glasses, the word commonly used for binoculars. He said they had asked for them in Southampton and were told there were none. When asked whether binoculars would have let him see the iceberg sooner, he simply said yes. When pressed on how much sooner, he gave the answer that stayed with the disaster for more than a century. Enough, just enough for us to get out of the way. That line in its own is powerful. That line in its own cannot carry the whole truth. Some historians argue that binoculars would not have solved the problem, because lookouts scanning a wide, black horizon often use their naked eyes. Binoculars narrow the field of vision. They help identify an object once it is seen. They do not always help find one hidden in the darkness of the night. Others point out that officers on the bridge had glasses. Others question whether the missing key truly locked away the lookout binoculars at all. But disasters do not need a clean explanation to haunt people. They need symbols, a sense of symbolism, and the key is a symbol with weight. A man leaves a ship, a key leaves with him. Ice warnings arrive, speeds continue, the sea flattens. The lookouts watch without glasses. Passengers dine, sleep, smoke, write letters, walked the polished decks, and believed they were part of something called triumph. Then, a dark shape appears where the horizon should be. Fleet rings the bell 3 times and telephones the bridge. Iceberg, right ahead. First Officer Murdoch orders the turn. The engines are put astern, according to traditional accounts, though the exact mechanics have been debated ever since. The bow begins to swing, and for a moment, history almost changes direction. But not enough. The ice does not explode the ship. It does something far worse. It brushes along the starboard side, With quiet, surgical damage beneath the waterline, compartments begin to flood. The ship remains lit, the deck remains calm, and for a short time, many passengers do not understand that the night has already made its decision. Titanic can survive some compartments flooding. This is its sole purpose as to what it was designed to do. This is why they believed it was unsinkable. What they did not account for was how many compartments it could withhold flooding. And the truth is, not that many. At first, the lifeboats look like an inconvenience, not salvation. The ship is warm, the lights are still on, the water outside is black and unthinkable. Some boats leave with empty seats, some passengers hesitate. Officers try to impose order on a calculation that is becoming more impossible by the minute. Then, far from the disaster, another ship enters the story. The RMS Carpathia was not the grand stage of the Atlantic that night. She was a simple liner on her own passage, carrying passengers and crew, moving through the dark on a different purpose entirely. Her wireless operator, Harold Cottam, caught Titanic's distress call and rushed the message to the captain Arthur Rostron. This is where the Titanic story changes tone. Up to this point, it is a story of small failures gathering speed. But from this point forward, it becomes a race. Rostron did not have the luxury of disbelief. He was told the Titanic had struck ice and needed immediate assistance. He ordered Carpathia turn around immediately and driven towards their position. When later questioned, he said the Titanic was about 58 miles away when he turned the ship around. Carpathia usually made about 14 knots. That night, with the boilers pushed to their very limits and every available hand called into service, she worked up to about 17.5 knots. That number matters. It was not simply fast. It was more than the ship normally had to give. It was more than the ship was designed to do. Rostron sent word for the chief engineer to get all the firemen out and do everything possible. Down below, men who had been off duty were pulled into the heat, coal dust, and pressure. The ship became a machine with one purpose: close the distance before the ocean finished what the Iceberg had started. Above deck, Carpathia prepared like a hospital, a lifeboat station, and a battlefield all at once. Boats were swung out, ladders were made ready, blankets and warm drinks were prepared, doctors and stewards were positioned, crew were sent to gangways, passenger spaces were reading for people who, if they reached the ship at all, would arrive soaked, frozen, stunned, and half unable to speak. But the heroic part was not only the preparation, it was the route. Carpathia was racing into the same ice region that had just killed Titanic. As she drove through the night, Rostron later testified that he saw a green flare and believed, just for a moment, that Titanic might still be afloat. Then the ice began appearing. At about 2:45, he saw an iceberg by a streak of starlight on it. From then until around 4 o'clock, he would continually alter his course to avoid icebergs. This was not a clean dash across open water. It had become a field of death with ice, through shapes that could not appear late and vanish again into the shadow. Carpathia had doubled lookouts. Men were posted forward, in the crow's nest, and in the eyes of the ship. Still, Rostron described one iceberg appearing so late that when daylight broke, it was less than a quarter of a mile away. That detail gives the rescue its edge. Carpathia was not simply arriving, she was risking everything. She was risking becoming the second disaster. Somewhere ahead, Titanic's lights went out. the great ship broke and disappeared. Lifeboats were scattered across miles of cold water. The people in them no longer had a liner above them. They had darkness, oars, ice, and the sound of the sea moving against wooden hulls. Then Carpathia's rockets appeared. For the people in the boats, that ship was not just a rescue. It was proof that the world still existed. It was smoke, steel, engines, ladders, voices, and light. It was the difference between a story that ended in the Atlantic and a story that would be told. At around 4:05, Rostrins stopped near the reporter position. At 4:10, Carpathia came alongside the first boat. One after another, survivors were brought aboard. The work did not take minutes, it took hours. The boats were scattered over 4 or 5 miles. By around 8 a.m., Carpathia had recovered the lifeboats she could and taken aboard more than 700 survivors. By then, the dawn had exposed what the night had hidden. Icebergs standing around the rescue ship, pieces of wreckage, empty sea, and no Titanic. That is the part of the story that the key alone does not hold. The missing key is the perfect opening because it feels like fate in miniature, but the rescue shows the opposite side of the butterfly effect. Small failures can build a catastrophe, but small actions can also push back against one. A wireless operator stays awake long enough to hear a call. A captain believes it immediately. Engineers force a liner beyond her ordinary speed, pushing it to its limit. Firemen shovel coal into brutal heat. Lookouts stare into an ice field. Officers prepare ladders, ropes, blankets, and hot drinks before anyone is even in sight. None of those actions saved the Titanic, but they saved the people the Titanic had not yet taken. In the official British report, the court recorded its admiration for Captain Rostron's conduct and said he did the very best that one could have possibly done. That line is plain, almost understated, but maybe plain English is the only language that fits, because the horror of Titanic is not only that so many people died, it is that margin between death and rescue was measured in decisions, distance, and minutes. A key leaves Southampton. A ship keeps speed. Lookouts see ice too late. A liner opens itself to the sea. Another ship turns in the dark and pushes harder than she was ever built for. History remembers Titanic as a symbol of arrogance, engineering, luxury, and loss. But in the last act, the story belongs partly to Carpathia, to the ship that came into the ice instead of away from it. The butterfly effect is not that one key sank Titanic. History is really that simple. It is that enormous tragedies are built on small hinges. One missing item, one unread warning, one order given just too late, one wireless operator still at his seat past his due time, one captain willing to risk it all, risk his own ship and risk his crew because somewhere ahead people were running out of time. And somewhere inside of all of these choices is the story of a key that left the ship before the ship left the world. And another ship that came through the darkness just fast enough to keep hundreds of names from sinking with it. That is the undeniable tragedy and beauty of the butterfly effect regarding the Titanic. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another story. I hope you enjoyed. Stay safe.